What if I told you that the person who destroyed your entire family, who took everything sacred and burned it to ashes, was sitting across from you at Thanksgiving dinner for 15 years? What if I told you that you passed the mashed potatoes to a monster, that you hugged evil goodnight, that you trusted your children with the devil himself? And what if I told you that when the truth finally came out, it wasn't the police who discovered it, it wasn't a detective or a journalist or even a suspicious neighbor? It was a 7-year-old girl with a crayon drawing that would unravel a web of darkness so thick, so suffocating, that 3 families would never be the same again. I know this because I lived it. I know this because I am the woman who married into that family. I am the woman who smiled in photographs next to a predator for over a decade. I am the woman who almost lost everything, including my own daughter, before I finally saw what had been hiding in plain sight all along. Now, before I take you through the darkest journey of my life, I need you to do something for me. If you have children, if you have nieces or nephews, if you have ever loved a child with every fiber of your being, I need you to share this video right now. Not because I want views, not because I want fame, but because what I am about to tell you could save a child's life. It could open your eyes to a threat you never knew existed in your own home, at your own dinner table, in your own family photographs. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. Stories that might just change the way you see the world and the people in it. And stay until the very end, because the ending of this story is something you will never see coming. Something that proves that justice, real justice, sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. My name is Rebecca Thornton, and I was 34 years old when my world collapsed. I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Millbrook, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where doors were left unlocked and children played outside until the streetlights came on. I met my husband, Daniel, at a church potluck when I was 22 years old. He was handsome in that quiet, reliable way, with kind eyes and a gentle voice that made you feel like everything would always be okay. His family welcomed me with open arms. His mother, Eleanor, treated me like the daughter she never had. His father, Richard, was a respected deacon at our church, and his older brother, Marcus, well, Marcus was the golden child. Everyone in Millbrook loved Marcus Thornton. He was a pediatrician, if you can believe that. He dedicated his life to helping children, to healing them, to making them feel safe. He had a beautiful wife named Christine and 2 perfect children of his own. Every Sunday, we gathered at Eleanor and Richard's farmhouse for dinner. Every holiday, we crowded around their massive oak table and gave thanks for our blessings. And every single time, Marcus sat at the head of that table like a king, beloved by all, trusted by everyone. I remember looking at him sometimes and thinking how lucky we all were to have him in our family. I remember thinking that my children were so fortunate to have an uncle who was a doctor, someone who could take care of them if they ever got sick, someone who understood children better than anyone. God, I was so blind. We were all so blind. And that blindness, that willful ignorance that we mistook for trust, it cost us more than I can ever put into words. I had 2 children with Daniel. Our daughter Emma was born first, a beautiful girl with curly brown hair and eyes that sparkled like she held the secrets of the universe inside them. 2 years later, our son Jacob came along, a rambunctious boy who worshipped his older sister and wanted to be just like his uncle Marcus when he grew up. They were my everything. They were the reason I woke up every morning, the reason I worked double shifts at the hospital where I served as a nurse, the reason I pushed through every difficult day with a smile on my face. I would have died for those children. I would have killed for them. And as it turns out, I almost had to. The trouble started so subtly that I didn't even recognize it as trouble at all. Emma was always a happy child, bright and curious and full of life. But somewhere around her 5th birthday, something changed. She became quieter, more withdrawn. She started having nightmares, terrible dreams that would wake her screaming in the middle of the night. She became clingy, refusing to let me out of her sight, crying hysterically whenever I tried to leave for work. I took her to see her pediatrician, and wouldn't you know it, Marcus insisted on examining her himself. He said it was just a phase, that many children went through periods of anxiety, that she would grow out of it. He was so calm, so reassuring, so confident in his diagnosis. And I believed him because why wouldn't I? He was family. He was a doctor. He was Marcus. But something in my gut, something I couldn't name or explain, something primal and ancient and maternal, it wouldn't let me rest. I started paying closer attention to Emma, watching her more carefully, trying to decode the sadness in her eyes that she was too young to put into words. I noticed that she became especially anxious around family gatherings, that she would find excuses to hide in her room when we visited the farmhouse, that she would cling to my legs whenever Marcus entered a room. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that I was projecting my own anxieties onto my child. I told myself that I was lucky to have such a loving, supportive family. And every time I told myself those lies, I pushed my daughter further into the darkness, further into his reach, further away from the help she so desperately needed. The night everything changed started like any other Friday evening. Daniel was working late at the construction company he managed, and I had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I was exhausted, bone-tired in that way that only nurses and new mothers understand. All I wanted was to take a hot shower and collapse into bed. But when I walked into Emma's room to kiss her goodnight, I found her sitting at her little desk, crayons scattered everywhere, tears streaming down her face. She was drawing something, pressing so hard that the crayons were breaking under the pressure of her tiny fingers. And when I looked at what she had created, when I saw the image that had poured out of her traumatized mind onto that innocent piece of paper, my entire world shattered into a million pieces. It was a picture of a monster with a doctor's coat and a familiar face. And my daughter, my precious, innocent, broken daughter, was underneath that monster, surrounded by darkness. I couldn't breathe. The walls of Emma's bedroom seemed to close in around me as I stared at that crayon drawing, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. The monster in the picture had brown hair, just like Marcus. It wore a white coat with a stethoscope around its neck, just like Marcus. And its hands, those terrible reaching hands, they were touching a small figure with curly brown hair that could only be my daughter. The small figure was crying blue crayon tears that dripped off the edge of the paper like a waterfall of sorrow. And in the corner of the drawing, in shaky, childish letters, Emma had written one word that would haunt me for the rest of my life. She had written secret. I sank to my knees beside her desk, my nursing training completely abandoning me in that moment of maternal horror. Every protocol I had learned about remaining calm in emergencies, every technique for maintaining composure in the face of trauma. It all disappeared like smoke in the wind. I was just a mother, a terrified mother, looking at evidence of something so horrific that my brain, literally, couldn't accept it as reality. This couldn't be happening. Not to my family. Not to my daughter. Not with Marcus, beloved Uncle Marcus, the pediatrician who had dedicated his life to healing children. Emma was watching me with those big, sad eyes, waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if she had done something wrong by drawing the truth. Children are so perceptive, so attuned to the emotional states of the adults around them. She could see that her drawing had upset me, and I could see the fear in her face, the worry that she was in trouble, the desperate hope that Mommy would somehow make everything okay. I forced myself to take a deep breath, to push aside my own panic and focus on what my daughter needed from me in that moment. I reached out and gently took her hands in mine, noticing for the first time how she flinched at the unexpected contact. How long had she been flinching like that? How many times had I missed that subtle sign of trauma because I was too busy, too distracted, too trusting of the people around us? The guilt that washed over me in that moment was almost as overwhelming as the horror. I was supposed to protect her. That was my one job as her mother, the sacred responsibility that had been placed in my hands the moment she took her first breath. And I had failed her in the worst possible way. I asked her to tell me about the drawing, keeping my voice as steady as I could, trying not to let her see how badly I was shaking. She didn't answer at first, just stared at the paper with an expression that no 5-year-old should ever wear. An expression of shame and fear and resignation that made her look decades older than her years. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she started to talk. And what she told me over the next hour, punctuated by sobs and silences and questions she was too young to know how to answer, it painted a picture of systematic abuse that had been going on for almost 2 years. It happened during family gatherings, she said. Uncle Marcus would find ways to get her alone, taking her on special walks, offering to play with her in the basement, volunteering to put her down for naps in the guest room while the other adults were busy talking and laughing and drinking wine in the living room. We had handed her to him on a silver platter, grateful for the help, never suspecting for a moment that we were delivering our child into the hands of a predator. He told her it was their special secret, that no one would believe her if she told, that bad things would happen to Mommy and Daddy if she ever said a word. He used her love for us as a weapon against her, manipulating her innocent mind with threats and lies and false promises. I held my daughter as she cried, her small body shaking with the release of trauma she had been carrying alone for far too long. I told her over and over again that she was brave, that none of this was her fault, that Mommy believed her and would never let anyone hurt her again. But even as I spoke those words of comfort, even as I tried to be the strong, protective mother she needed, part of me was already thinking about what came next. Part of me was already calculating, planning, preparing for the battle that I knew was coming. Because here's what people don't tell you about situations like this. They don't tell you that when you accuse a beloved family member of something so terrible, the family doesn't automatically rally around the victim. They don't tell you that the first instinct of most people, even good people, even loving people, is to deny, to minimize, to protect the status quo at any cost. They don't tell you that speaking the truth can cost you everything, that seeking justice can tear your life apart at the seams, that doing the right thing can sometimes feel like the hardest thing you've ever done. I called Daniel first. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial the number. And when he answered, when I heard his cheerful voice asking what was wrong, I almost couldn't get the words out. How do you tell your husband that his brother, his best friend, his childhood hero, has been molesting your daughter? How do you shatter someone's world with a single phone call? I did it the only way I could, bluntly and directly, because there was no gentle way to deliver news like that. I told him what Emma had drawn. I told him what she had said. I told him that we needed to call the police immediately. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like hours. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was strange, hollow, like he was speaking from very far away. He said we needed to be careful. He said we needed to be sure. He said that these were very serious accusations and that we couldn't just go around destroying people's lives without being absolutely certain. And in that moment, in that hesitation, in that instinctive defense of his brother over his daughter, something broke inside me. I realized that this was going to be even harder than I had imagined. I realized that I might have to fight this battle alone. I called the police that night anyway over Daniel's objections. 2 officers came to our house and took a preliminary statement from me while Emma slept fitfully in her room. They told me that cases like this were complicated, that they would need to interview Emma with a trained forensic interviewer, that they would need evidence beyond the drawing and her account. They were professional and compassionate, but I could see in their eyes a weariness that came from handling too many cases, just like this one. Cases where the accused was someone respectable, someone trusted, someone who would be vigorously defended by everyone who thought they knew him. The next few weeks were a blur of interviews and examinations and paperwork. A child psychologist met with Emma multiple times, gently guiding her through the trauma with techniques designed to help children express what they had experienced without re-traumatizing them. A medical examination revealed physical evidence that supported Emma's account. Evidence that made me physically sick to learn about, but that strengthened our case immeasurably. The police began building a file, gathering information, preparing to make an arrest. And through it all, Daniel remained distant, torn between loyalty to his daughter and loyalty to his brother, unable to fully commit to either side of the widening chasm that was splitting his family in two. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between the truth and the people you love? Have you ever found yourself standing at a crossroads where doing the right thing meant losing everything you held dear? Think about that for a moment. Think about what you would do if you were in my shoes, facing a monster that wore a family member's face, fighting for justice in a world that would rather look away. I want you to leave a comment telling me what you think you would do, how you would handle the impossible choice between family loyalty and protecting the innocent. Because what happened next tested every belief I had about love, about family, about the limits of human forgiveness. And I need to know that someone out there understands what it feels like to walk through fire for the truth. The Thornton family response to Emma's allegations was swift, coordinated, and devastating. Eleanor and Richard, my beloved in-laws, who had treated me like a daughter for over a decade, showed up at our house 3 days after I filed the police report. They didn't come alone. They brought Marcus and Christine, along with a lawyer in an expensive suit who smelled like cigars and entitlement. They arranged themselves in my living room like an opposing army, and then they declared war on my daughter and me. Eleanor did most of the talking at first. She had been crying, I could tell, her eyes red-rimmed, and her voice thick with emotion. But her tears were not for Emma. Her tears were for Marcus, her firstborn son, her golden child, the doctor who had made her so proud, the man whose reputation we were destroying with our vicious lies. She begged us to reconsider. She reminded us of all the good Marcus had done, all the children he had healed, all the lives he had saved. She asked us if we really wanted to destroy all of that based on the confused drawings of a troubled child. I listened to her speak, and I felt something cold settle into my chest, something hard and unyielding that would become my armor in the months ahead. My mother-in-law, the woman who had baked cookies with my children and sent them birthday cards and claimed to love them like her own grandchildren, was looking at me with contempt. She was calling my daughter a liar. She was prioritizing her son's reputation over my child's safety. And in that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that I was completely alone in this fight. The lawyer spoke next, and his tone was very different from Eleanor's emotional plea. He was calm, methodical, terrifying. He explained in precise legal terms what would happen if we continued to pursue these allegations. He mentioned defamation lawsuits and custody challenges and criminal charges for filing false police reports. He painted a picture of a future where I would lose everything, where my children would be taken away from me, where my nursing license would be revoked, where I would be bankrupted by legal fees and destroyed by public humiliation. He made it very clear that the Thornton family had resources and connections that I could not hope to match, and that they were prepared to use every single one of them to protect Marcus. But it was what Marcus himself said that affected me most deeply. He looked at me with those kind eyes that I had trusted for so many years, and he expressed his profound concern for Emma's mental health. He said that she had always been an anxious child, that she had a vivid imagination, that she might be acting out after overhearing something inappropriate on television or from other children at school. He suggested, with apparently genuine sadness, that perhaps I was projecting my own issues onto my daughter, that my demanding work schedule and marital stress might have caused me to see problems where none existed. He offered, in his most professional and caring voice, to recommend an excellent child psychiatrist who could help Emma work through whatever was really troubling her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to launch myself across the room and tear out his eyes with my bare hands. I wanted to expose him right there, in front of his enabling family and his expensive lawyer and his complicit wife, who sat silently beside him pretending not to notice that she was married to a monster. But I did none of those things. I sat in my chair, and I kept my voice steady, and I told them all to get out of my house. I told them that Emma's interview with the forensic psychologist had been recorded and submitted as evidence. I told them that the medical examination had revealed findings consistent with her account. I told them that I would testify in court, that I would shout the truth from the rooftops, that I would burn their precious family reputation to the ground if that's what it took to protect my daughter and any other child who might fall into Marcus's hands. They left shortly after that, their threats hanging in the air like poison gas. Daniel followed them outside, and I watched through the window as he stood on the driveway with his parents and his brother, talking in low, urgent tones that I couldn't hear. When he came back inside, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He said we needed to think about this more carefully. He said that maybe there had been some misunderstanding, that maybe Emma had misinterpreted something innocent. He said that his family had been good to us, that Marcus had helped us financially when we were struggling, that we owed them the benefit of the doubt. That was the night I knew my marriage was over. Not because Daniel had failed to immediately believe our daughter, although that was devastating enough, but because I saw in his face the same thing I had seen in Eleanor's eyes, in Richard's stern expression, in Marcus's calm confidence. I saw a willingness to sacrifice Emma on the altar of family loyalty. I saw a readiness to dismiss her trauma as fantasy rather than confront the uncomfortable truth about someone they loved. And I knew in that moment that I would never be able to look at my husband the same way again. The weeks that followed were brutal. The Thornton family lawyer filed a motion questioning my fitness as a mother, citing my long work hours and what they characterized as my unstable emotional state. They hired a private investigator who followed me everywhere, looking for anything they could use against me. They contacted my supervisors at the hospital and implied that I might be mentally unwell, putting my nursing license at risk. They reached out to mutual friends and family members, spinning a narrative in which I was a vindictive, attention-seeking woman who had fabricated allegations against an innocent man for reasons that changed depending on who they were talking to. And it worked. People who had known me for years, people who had held my children at their baptisms, people who had celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday evenings with us, they started pulling away. Some of them believed the Thornton family's version of events entirely. Others simply didn't want to get involved, didn't want to take sides, didn't want to make things awkward. They chose the path of least resistance, which meant they chose to abandon Emma and me in our darkest hour. I moved out of our family home and into a small apartment with both children. Daniel didn't fight me on custody, not yet, although his lawyer made it clear that could change depending on how the criminal case proceeded. I kept working at the hospital, kept paying bills, kept putting one foot in front of the other, even when everything inside me wanted to collapse into a heap and never move again. I did it for Emma, who needed her mother to be strong. I did it for Jacob, who was too young to understand why Daddy wasn't living with us anymore, but who could feel the tension and fear that permeated our new life. And I did it because some part of me, some stubborn, unbreakable core that I hadn't known I possessed, refused to let Marcus win. The criminal case moved slowly, as these cases always do. The district attorney's office reviewed the evidence and eventually decided to press charges, which felt like a victory until I learned how difficult it would be to convict. Cases involving child witnesses are notoriously challenging, especially when the accused is a respected community member with no prior record and unlimited resources for his defense. The prosecutor, a tired woman named Sarah Chen, who had clearly fought this battle many times before, warned me that we might lose. She warned me that Emma would have to testify, that she would be cross-examined, that the defense would do and everything in their power to confuse her and discredit her and make her look like an unreliable witness. I asked Sarah if she believed us. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something I will never forget. She said that she had worked these cases for 15 years, and she had learned to trust her instincts about when a child was telling the truth. And she said that Emma was one of the most credible young witnesses she had ever encountered. She said that my daughter had a quiet courage that would serve her well on the stand. She said that we had a real chance at justice, but that I needed to understand that justice and victory were not always the same thing. The trial began on a cold November morning, almost 18 months after Emma had drawn that terrible picture with her broken crayons. The courthouse was the imposing stone building that had witnessed countless human dramas over its century of existence. But I doubted it had ever seen anything quite like what was about to unfold within its walls. The Thornton family arrived in force, a united front of expensive suits and practiced expressions of calm confidence. Marcus looked rested and healthy, like a man without a care in the world, like a man who knew that he was going to walk free despite everything he had done. I sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with Sarah Chen and Emma's court-appointed advocate, a kind woman named Patricia, who had helped prepare Emma for what lay ahead. I had spent months working with a therapist of my own, learning how to manage my emotions so that I could be present for my daughter without breaking down in front of the jury. I had practiced staying calm when Marcus looked at me. I had practiced not reacting when his defense attorney said things that made my blood boil. I had transformed myself into a weapon of pure, focused determination, and I was ready to fight. And the prosecution's case was built around Emma's testimony, the medical evidence, and the testimony of a child psychologist who would explain to the jury how traumatized children often delay disclosure and why Emma's behavior in the months before her revelation was consistent with ongoing abuse. Sarah had also found 2 other victims who had come forward after news of Marcus's arrest became public. They were older now, young women in their 20s, who had been patients of his many years ago, and their accounts were horrifyingly similar to Emma's. But the defense was formidable. Marcus's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Robert Sterling, who had made his career defending wealthy clients accused of terrible crimes, attacked every piece of evidence with surgical precision. He argued that the medical findings were ambiguous and could have innocent explanations. He brought in his own expert witnesses who questioned the reliability of children's testimony and suggested that Emma might have been coached or confused. He portrayed the other victims as opportunists seeking attention and money, pointing out inconsistencies in their accounts, and highlighting the years of delay in their disclosures. And then on the 4th day of the trial, it was Emma's turn to testify. I had prepared myself for this moment as best I could, but nothing could have truly readied me for the experience of watching my 7-year-old daughter take the witness stand and face the man who had stolen her innocence. She looked so small up there, dwarfed by the wooden witness box, her voice barely loud enough for the microphones to pick up. But her eyes were steady, and when Sarah asked her to tell the jury what had happened, she did. She told them about the special games that Uncle Marcus wanted to play. She told them about the secret room in the basement of the farmhouse where he would take her during family gatherings. She told them about the things he said and did, using the clinical terms that the forensic interviewer had taught her so that there could be no ambiguity about what she was describing. She told them about the threats, about how he said her parents would be hurt if she told anyone, about how he made her feel like everything was her fault. And she told them about the drawing, about how she'd finally found a way to express what she couldn't say out loud, about how her mommy had seen the truth and believed her. Robert Sterling's cross-examination was everything I had feared and worse. He was gentle at first, almost fatherly, asking Emma about her hobbies and her favorite subjects in school and her friends. He established rapport with her, made her feel comfortable, made the jury see her as a normal, happy child rather than a traumatized victim. And then slowly, insidiously, he began to twist everything she had said. He asked her if she remembered exactly what day the first incident happened. She didn't. He asked her if she remembered what she was wearing, what Marcus was wearing, what time of day it was. She couldn't recall all the details. He asked her if anyone had told her what to say before she testified, and she said yes, because of course she had been prepared by the prosecution and her advocate, which was standard procedure, but which Sterling made sound like coaching and manipulation. He suggested that maybe she had dreamed some of these things, that maybe she had seen something on television and gotten confused, that maybe her mommy had asked her leading questions, that planted false memories in her young mind. I watched my daughter begin to falter under the onslaught of doubt that Sterling was creating. Her voice got smaller. Her answers got shorter. She started looking at me with desperate, confused eyes, seeking reassurance that she was doing the right thing. And I couldn't help her. I couldn't speak or gesture or do anything except sit there and watch as this man tried to destroy my daughter's credibility one question at a time. But then something remarkable happened. Something that I believe with all my heart was a moment of divine intervention or cosmic justice, or whatever name you want to give to the forces that sometimes align to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. Sterling asked Emma one question too many. He asked her in his most skeptical and condescending voice why she had never told anyone sooner if these terrible things were really happening. He asked her why she had kept this big secret for so long if it was really so bad. And Emma, my beautiful, brave, broken and rebuilding daughter, looked him straight in the eyes and answered in a voice that carried to every corner of that courtroom. She said that she hadn't told anyone because she loved her family and didn't want to hurt them. She said that she kept quiet because she was trying to protect her mommy and daddy from the bad things Uncle Marcus said would happen if she talked. She said that the secret made her feel sick inside, like there was a monster living in her stomach, but she carried it anyway because she thought that's what good girls were supposed to do. And then she asked Robert Sterling, in the most innocent and devastating way imaginable, if he had ever loved someone so much that he was willing to hurt himself to keep them safe. The courtroom went absolutely silent. I saw tears on the faces of several jurors. I saw Sterling's confident expression falter for just a moment before he recovered and ended his cross-examination. I saw Marcus, for the first time since the trial began, look something other than calm and confident. I saw fear in his eyes. The same fear he had instilled in my daughter and who knows how many other children over the years. The trial continued for another week after Emma's testimony. There were more witnesses, more arguments, more legal maneuvering that I barely followed. The other victims told their stories, corroborating the pattern of behavior that Emma had described. Character witnesses for Marcus tried to paint him as a devoted healer, who could never hurt a child. But their testimony felt hollow after what the jury had heard. The closing arguments were emotional and exhausting, with Sarah Chen delivering a powerful plea for justice, and Sterling making one final attempt to create reasonable doubt. And then the jury went to deliberate, and there was nothing left to do but wait. They were out for 3 days. 3 days of pacing my tiny apartment or jumping every time my phone rang, trying to keep Emma distracted with movies and games, and pretending that everything was normal. 3 days of Sarah Chen's reassuring voice telling me that a long deliberation wasn't necessarily bad news, that it meant the jury was taking their responsibility seriously, that it meant they were carefully weighing all the evidence. 3 days of wondering if everything we had been through, everything Emma had endured, would ultimately be for nothing. On the morning of the 4th day, I received the call. The jury had reached a verdict. I don't remember the drive to the courthouse. I don't remember parking or walking through security or finding my seat in the gallery. Everything was a blur of anxiety and desperate hope until the moment the jury foreman stood to deliver their decision. I grabbed Patricia's hand on one side and Sarah's on the other, squeezing so hard that I probably left bruises. I couldn't look at Marcus or his family. I couldn't look at Daniel, who had chosen to sit with the Thorntons despite everything. I could only stare at the foreman's face and pray for the word that would mean my daughter had been believed. Guilty. Guilty on all counts of criminal sexual conduct with a minor. The sound that came out of me was something between a sob and a scream. The gallery erupted in noise, gasps and cries from both sides of the courtroom, but I barely heard any of it. I was holding on to Patricia and Sarah like they were the only things keeping me tethered to the earth, tears streaming down my face, my whole body shaking with relief and grief and the release of tension that had been building for almost 2 years. I looked at Marcus then, finally allowing myself to see the moment when his mask of calm confidence shattered. His face went white. His hands gripped the edge of the defense table so hard, his knuckles turned the same color as his face. He turned to look at his parents, at his wife, at the family that had rallied around him and defended him and attacked his victims on his behalf. Eleanor was sobbing. Richard sat completely still as if he had turned to stone. Christine's expression was unreadable, but she wasn't looking at her husband. She was staring at nothing, her eyes empty, like a woman who had just realized that her entire life had been built on lies. And Daniel, my almost ex-husband, the father of my children, the man I had once loved with everything I had. He was crying too, but I couldn't tell if his tears were for Marcus or for Emma or for himself. He looked like a man who had lost everything, which I suppose he had. He had chosen his brother over his daughter, and now he would have to live with that choice for the rest of his life. The sentencing hearing took place 6 weeks later. Sarah had prepared a victim impact statement for me to read, but in the end I spoke mostly from my heart. I told the judge about the little girl Emma had been before the abuse, bright and curious and full of joy. I told him about the nightmares and the anxiety and the way she flinched at unexpected touches. I told him about the other victims who had come forward, about the years of silence and shame they had endured, about the courage it had taken for them to relive their trauma in open court. And I told him that no sentence would ever be enough to undo the damage Marcus had done, but that I hoped he would send a message to other predators and to other victims that our society would not tolerate this kind of crime. The judge sentenced Marcus to 40 years in prison. With good behavior, he would be eligible for parole in 20 years, at which point he would be 73 years old and a registered sex offender for life. His medical license was revoked permanently. His name was added to the National Sex Offender Registry. Everything he had worked for, everything he had achieved, everything he had used as a shield to hide his true nature, it was all gone. But here's what I learned in the months after the verdict. In the long, slow work of putting our lives back together, justice is not the same as healing. Winning the trial was not the end of our story. It was just the beginning of a different chapter, one where Emma and I had to figure out how to live in a world that had hurt us so deeply, how to trust again, how to love again, how to be something other than victims. Emma's healing has been gradual and non-linear. There are good days when she laughs and plays like any other child her age, when you would never guess what she has been through. There are bad days when the memories ambush her without warning, when she wakes up screaming or becomes so anxious that she can't leave my side. She sees a wonderful therapist named Dr. Martinez, who specializes in childhood trauma, and the progress she has made over the past 3 years has been nothing short of miraculous. But she will carry what happened to her forever. It is a part of her story now, a chapter she didn't choose and didn't deserve, but which has shaped who she is becoming. I divorced Daniel shortly after the trial. It wasn't a contentious divorce, not in the traditional sense. We had already said everything there was to say, already drawn the battle lines that couldn't be uncrossed. He wanted joint custody of the children, and after much negotiation, we reached an agreement that gave him regular visitation. He has tried, I think, to be a better father in the years since. He apologized to Emma for not believing her immediately, although I don't know if she has truly forgiven him. He cut ties with his parents and hasn't spoken to Marcus since the conviction, but there is a wall between us now that will never come down, a fundamental breach of trust that no amount of time or therapy can repair. The Thornton family has largely faded from our lives, which is both a relief and a strange kind of loss. Eleanor and Richard still believe Marcus is innocent, the victims of a grave miscarriage of justice. They visit him in prison regularly and have spent much of their retirement savings on appeals that have so far been unsuccessful. Christine divorced Marcus while he was awaiting sentencing and moved across the country with their children, severing all ties with the family that had protected her husband and enabled his crimes. I don't know what she knew or suspected during those years of marriage, and I'm not sure I want to know. I thought our story was over. I thought the villain was in prison, the victim was healing. The mother who had fought for justice was slowly rebuilding her life. I thought we had earned our peaceful ending, had paid enough in blood and tears for a chance at normalcy. I was wrong. 3 years after Marcus's conviction, I received a letter. It came in an ordinary envelope with a prison return address, and at first I assumed it was some kind of official notification about an appeal or a parole hearing. But when I opened it and saw the handwriting, when I read the first few sentences, my blood ran cold. The letter was from Marcus, somehow smuggled out through unofficial channels to avoid the screening process that would have blocked it from reaching me. He wrote that he was dying. Cancer, apparently, had been growing in his body for the past year and had progressed to a terminal stage. He wrote that facing death had given him clarity, had forced him to confront the truth about himself that he had denied for so long. He wrote that he wanted to confess, to tell me things that even the trial hadn't revealed, to unburden his conscience before meeting whatever judgment awaited him on the other side. And then he wrote something that made the floor seem to drop out from under me. He wrote that Emma was not his only victim in our family. He wrote that he had been abusing children for over 30 years, starting when he was barely out of adolescence himself. He wrote that there was someone else, someone close to me, someone whose abuse had been going on even longer than Emma's, and whose silence had been bought with threats and manipulation, just like hers. He was writing about Jacob, my son, my 10-year-old boy who had never said a word, never drawn a picture, never shown any of the signs that had alerted me to Emma's suffering. I called Dr. Martinez immediately, my voice barely coherent through the panic that was choking me. She talked me through the initial shock and helped me develop a plan for approaching Jacob carefully, without traumatizing him further if the allegation was true or creating false memories if it wasn't. She reminded me of everything I had learned about how differently children can respond to abuse, how some become withdrawn and symptomatic, while others learn to compartmentalize and hide their pain so effectively that even loving parents can miss the signs. That evening, I sat with Jacob in his room and told him about the letter. I didn't share the graphic details, just the basic claim that Marcus had made. I told him that if anything had happened, anything at all, it wasn't his fault and he wouldn't be in trouble. I told him that I would love him no matter what, that nothing could ever change that. I told him that secrets weren't meant to protect the people who hurt us. They were meant to protect us from seeking the help we needed. My son looked at me with those eyes that were so like his father's, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice that was eerily calm, he asked me if Emma was okay now. I told him she was getting better every day. He nodded, processing this information with the serious expression of a child who has had to grow up too fast. And then he told me that the same things had happened to him, starting when he was 4 years old, continuing every time we visited the farmhouse, every time Marcus came to our house, every time there was an opportunity and a moment of privacy. He told me that he hadn't said anything because Marcus told him that boys weren't supposed to talk about these things, that people would think he was weird or broken or gay. He told me that he had felt ashamed in a way he couldn't explain, that he had built walls around those memories so thick that sometimes he almost forgot they were there. He told me that watching Emma go through the trial, watching her be brave enough to speak her truth, had made him realize that maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought, but he still couldn't bring himself to add to my burden, to give me another child to worry about, to make everything even harder than it already was. I held my son while he finally cried. I held him and told him the same things I told Emma 3 years earlier, that he was brave, that none of this was his fault, that I believed him and would always protect him. I held him and felt my heart break all over again, shattered into even smaller pieces than before, because how had I missed this? How had I been so focused on Emma's healing that I had failed to see my son suffering in silence right in front of me? The additional charges against Marcus were filed within weeks. The prison medical staff confirmed that his cancer was indeed terminal, that he likely had less than 6 months to live. His lawyer argued that there was no point in additional prosecution, that his client was already serving a life sentence and would never be free regardless of the outcome. But the district attorney pushed forward anyway, and I was grateful for that. I wanted Jacob's story to be part of the official record. I wanted his voice to be heard, even if Marcus died before the new trial could be completed. In the end, Marcus survived long enough to plead guilty to the charges involving Jacob. He died in the prison hospital 2 months later, with his parents by his side, still proclaiming his innocence despite the confession he had signed. I did not attend the funeral. Neither did Emma or Jacob. We stayed home and watched movies and ate ice cream and tried to believe that this particular chapter was finally truly closed. But even death couldn't end the damage Marcus had done. His letter had contained one more revelation, one more secret that he claimed to be sharing in a spirit of repentance and truth. He wrote that he had kept records, hidden away in a place only he knew, records of other children he had abused over the decades, names and dates and details that could help investigators identify victims who might still be suffering in silence, who might need to know that they had been believed, that their abuser had finally been brought to justice. He offered to reveal the location of these records in exchange for one thing. He wanted to see Emma. He wanted to apologize to her in person, to ask for her forgiveness, to find some kind of peace before he died. He claimed it was for her benefit that psychology studies showed victims sometimes found closure in confronting their abusers. But I knew the truth. It was about him. It was always about him, about his needs, his desires, his warped sense of entitlement that extended even to his own death. I almost threw the letter away. I almost burned it and pretended I had never received it. But then I thought about those other children, now adults scattered across the country, carrying burdens they might never have understood. I thought about how different Emma's path might have been if she had never known the truth about what happened to her. And I made the hardest decision of my life. I asked Emma if she wanted to see him. She said yes. My daughter, my brave and broken and endlessly surprising daughter, said that she wanted to face the monster one final time. She said that she had questions she needed answered, things she needed to say, words that had been building inside her for years. She said that she wasn't afraid anymore, or at least that she was afraid but wanted to do it anyway. She said that this was her choice and she was asking me to respect it. We prepared for weeks. Dr. Martinez worked with Emma extensively, role-playing possible scenarios, developing coping strategies, making sure she understood that she could leave at any time, that the power was in her hands. I consulted with lawyers and victim advocates and prison officials, navigating the bureaucratic nightmare of arranging a visit between a dying inmate and the child he had abused. There were moments when I almost called the whole thing off, when my protective instincts screamed at me that I was making a terrible mistake. But every time I looked at Emma's determined face, I knew that this was something she needed to do for herself. The prison was exactly as depressing as you would expect. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant barely masking something worse underneath. Marcus had been moved to the medical unit and was too weak to receive visitors in the normal meeting area. So we were taken to a room that looked more like a hospital than a prison cell. He was lying in a bed hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed, barely recognizable as the handsome, confident man who had charmed his way through 15 years of family gatherings. Emma walked into that room with her head held high. I followed behind her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, every muscle in my body tense with the effort of not throwing myself at the man in that bed and finishing what the cancer had started. There was a guard in the corner and a social worker near the door, but Emma had asked that they give her space to speak, and they had agreed to maintain a respectful distance. Marcus opened his eyes when he heard us enter. They were the same eyes I remembered, kind and gentle and utterly deceptive. He smiled weakly and said Emma's name like it was a precious thing, like he had any right to that familiarity. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him to rot in hell. But this wasn't my moment. This was Emma's. She stood at the foot of his bed and looked at him for a long moment without speaking. The silence stretched until it became its own kind of conversation. A wordless exchange between predator and prey that I couldn't fully understand. And then, in a voice that was steady and strong, my daughter began to speak. She told him what he had taken from her. She told him about the nightmares that still visited her some nights, about the way she flinched when strangers touched her, about the years of therapy it had taken to learn that she wasn't broken or dirty or damaged beyond repair. She told him about the guilt she had carried for so long, the irrational belief that somehow she had caused what happened, that if she had been a different kind of child, it wouldn't have happened. She told him about the moment she finally understood that he was the monster, not her, that the shame belonged to him and him alone. And then she did something that I will remember for the rest of my life. She forgave him, not because he deserved it, not because what he did was forgivable in any moral or spiritual sense, but because carrying the weight of her anger and her pain and her desire for revenge was killing her slowly, poisoning her from the inside, giving him power over her long after he had lost the ability to physically harm her. She told him that she was choosing to let go of the hatred not for him but for herself. She was taking back the control he had stolen, reclaiming her own narrative, refusing to let the worst thing that had ever happened to her define who she would become. Marcus was crying by the time she finished. Whether his tears were genuine remorse or self-pity or simply the emotional instability of a dying man, I couldn't say. He whispered that he was sorry, that he had never meant to hurt her, that there was something wrong with him that he had never understood and never been able to control. It was the same excuse that predators have been making since the beginning of time. The abdication of responsibility disguised as confession. Emma nodded once, acknowledging that she had heard him, and then she asked about the records. She asked where he had hidden the information about his other victims. She told him that if he really wanted to make amends, if he really wanted to do one good thing before he died, he would help those other children find the closure they deserved. And he told her. He gave her the location, a safety deposit box in a bank 2 counties away, registered under a false name. He gave her the key, which had been sewn into the lining of his prison-issued jacket. He gave her everything she asked for, and when he was finished, she turned and walked out of that room without looking back. I followed her, my heart pounding, my mind reeling from what I'd just witnessed. In the hallway outside the medical unit, she stopped and leaned against the wall, suddenly looking like the child she still was underneath all that strength and resilience. I wrapped my arms around her and held her while she shook, while the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation drained away and left her small and vulnerable in its wake. We found the safety deposit box 2 days later, Inside were notebooks filled with dates and names and descriptions, a catalog of evil that spanned 3 decades and multiple states. There were photographs too, evidence that should have been destroyed but which Marcus had kept for reasons I prefer not to contemplate. We turned everything over to federal authorities, who launched an investigation that would eventually identify 47 additional victims and lead to the reopening of several cold cases. Marcus died before the investigation was complete. He died surrounded by family, at peace with himself, if not with God, never truly grasping the magnitude of the suffering he had caused. His parents buried him in the family plot next to ancestors who had lived honorable lives, a final insult to his victims that I tried not to let consume me with rage. But something remarkable grew out of that investigation. Several of his victims, connected through the case, began reaching out to each other. They formed support groups and advocacy organizations. They lobbied for stronger child protection laws and better training for mandatory reporters. And they transformed their shared trauma into a force for good, determined to ensure that what happened to them would be less likely to happen to future generations. Emma and Jacob became part of that community. They found others who understood what they had been through, who didn't look at them with pity or discomfort, who could talk openly about the complicated process of healing from childhood sexual abuse. They found their tribe, their people, their chosen family of survivors. And I found something I had thought I had lost forever. I found hope. It has been 7 years since Marcus died. Emma is 14 now, a freshman in high school, passionate about art and drama and fiercely protective of her younger brother. She still sees Dr. Martinez occasionally, checking in when life gets overwhelming or memories resurface unexpectedly. She has spoken publicly about her experience at school assemblies and community events, using her story to help other children understand that they can speak up if something is wrong, that they will be believed, that there are adults who will fight for them. Jacob is 12, quieter than his sister, but equally strong in his own way. His healing has looked different from Emma's, more internal and private, but no less real. He plays basketball and builds elaborate Lego structures, and has a small circle of close friends who know his history and love him anyway. He told me recently that he wants to be a therapist when he grows up, that he wants to help other kids who have been through hard things. I cried when he said that. Tears of pride and grief and overwhelming love. I am 46 years old now, and my life looks nothing like I imagined it would when I was a young woman planning my future at that church potluck where I met Daniel. I never remarried, although I have had relationships and even found something close to love again. My work as a nurse took on new meaning after everything we went through, and I eventually transitioned into forensic nursing, specializing in examining children who may have experienced abuse. I like to think that my experience as a mother who almost missed the signs helps me connect with families who are going through their own nightmares. Daniel and I have reached a kind of peace. He is remarried now to a woman who seems kind and whom the children like well enough. He has done his best to be present for Emma and Jacob, to support their healing, to never again fail them the way he failed them when it mattered most. I don't know if they have fully forgiven him. I don't know if I have. But I have let go of the anger because holding on to it was hurting me more than it was hurting him. The Thornton family has mostly faded from my awareness. Eleanor died 2 years ago, still believing her son was innocent. never speaking to her grandchildren after they testified against him. Richard is in a nursing home with dementia, the past mercifully clouded by a disease that has erased most of his memories. Christine reached out to me once, a brief email apologizing for not seeing what was happening under her own roof. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. Some things can't be made right with words. I think often about forgiveness, about what it means, and whether it is truly possible when the crime is as terrible as what Marcus did to my children. Emma seems to have found some version of it, a letting go, that is less about absolving the sinner and more about freeing herself from the burden of perpetual victimhood. Jacob is still working toward something that might look like peace, still processing and growing and becoming. And me? I have learned that forgiveness is not a single moment or decision, but a practice, something you have to choose again and again, something that feels impossible some days and almost natural on others. What I know for certain is this: we survived. My children and I walked through the fire and came out the other side, scarred but not destroyed. We found strength we didn't know we had and support from people we never expected. We proved that speaking the truth, even when it costs you everything, is always worth it in the end. And we discovered that the opposite of trauma is not the absence of pain, but the presence of connection, of love, of hope for a future that the past does not control. If you have watched this story until the end, I want you to know that you are part of our community now. You have borne witness to our pain and our triumph, and that matters more than you might realize. If there is a child in your life who is suffering in silence, I pray that this story gives you the courage to look closer, to ask the hard questions, to believe them when they find the words to tell you what is happening. And if you are a survivor yourself, if you are carrying a secret that feels too heavy to bear, please know that you are not alone. There are people who will believe you. There are people who will fight for you. There are people who have walked this path before you and who are reaching back to help you find your way. Emma drew a picture that saved her life and eventually saved her brother's too. She used crayons and paper to speak a truth that words couldn't capture, and that truth set her free. I don't know what your picture looks like, what medium you will use to express the inexpressible, what form your cry for help will take. But I know that someone is waiting to see it. Someone is ready to believe you. Someone will fight for you the way I fought for my children. That is the ending of our story, but it is not the end. Because as long as there are children being hurt in silence, as long as there are predators hiding in plain sight, as long as there are families who would rather protect their reputations than their youngest members, the fight continues. And you, by watching until the end, by bearing witness, by perhaps sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it, you are part of that fight now. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. And if this story touched you, if it opened your eyes or stirred something in your heart, please share it. Not for me, not for views or algorithm numbers, but because somewhere out there is a parent who needs to know that their instincts are right, a child who needs to know that adults will believe them, a survivor who needs to know that healing is possible. Subscribe to this channel so you'll be here for the next story, because there are always more stories, more truths that need to be told, more darkness that needs to be brought into the light. My name is Rebecca Thornton, These are my children, Emma and Jacob, and we are living proof that love is stronger than evil, that truth is more powerful than lies, and that the only truly unforgivable crime is remaining silent when a child is crying out to be saved.